The rejection. Sergeant Maya Daniels had just completed a long deployment overseas. After months of serving in a foreign land, her mind was filled with thoughts of home, her family, friends, and the peaceful life she missed so much. The military had been tough, but now, as she boarded the flight back, it was supposed to be her moment of relief. The first-class seat she had reserved was the final touch to make her journey comfortable after such a grueling experience. Maya walked confidently towards the gate, her uniform crisp and neat. She had earned this seat. A soldier's life wasn't easy, and she deserved a little comfort after everything. The flight attendant at the gate greeted her with a polite smile. Maya could already feel the excitement of finally being able to sit back, relax, and just let the hours of travel pass by in peace. "Good evening, ma'am. How can I assist you?" the attendant asked, her voice cheerful. "I'm Sergeant Maya Daniels," she said, offering her ticket and ID. "I have a first-class seat." The attendant took the ticket and scanned it through the system. A moment later, the smile on her face faded slightly. She looked at the screen again, then back at Maya. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Your seat is in economy," the flight attendant said, her tone colder now. Maya blinked, confused. "What do you mean? My ticket clearly says I'm in first class." The attendant's smile was forced as she handed back the ticket. "I'm afraid the system shows your seat in economy. Perhaps there was a mix-up." Maya's heart sank. This was not the treatment she was used to. She had flown numerous times before and had always been treated with respect, especially when traveling in first class. The flight attendant seemed calm, but Maya could feel something wasn't right. It wasn't just a mistake. Something was off, and she wasn't sure what. "I don't understand," Maya said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I've had this seat confirmed for weeks. I need to speak with someone in charge." The attendant hesitated for a moment, then nodded and motioned towards the front of the plane. "I'll let the manager know. Please wait here." As Maya walked slowly to the boarding area, the other passengers were already starting to settle into their seats. A few glanced her way, and she could hear murmurs among them. It felt like everyone was watching her. She shook her head and tried to focus on what was happening. She was tired and frustrated. She needed to get on that plane, but right now, all she could do was wait. Minutes passed, and the boarding process continued. Still, no one came to speak with her. The manager never showed up, and Maya's frustration began to grow. She was starting to feel like an outsider, her mind racing with thoughts of what could possibly be going on. She had done everything right, booked her seat, checked in early, and yet here she was, standing in the middle of the terminal while others took their seats in first class. Finally, she saw the flight attendant walking towards her again. This time, she had a different expression, more serious, almost apologetic. "Ma'am, I'm afraid there's been some confusion," she said quietly. "There was no mistake with your booking. Your seat is indeed in economy." Maya's eyebrows furrowed. "But my ticket says otherwise. I've been flying first class for years, and I've never had an issue." The attendant lowered her voice. "I understand, but the policy is clear. We reserve first class for certain passengers. It's a privilege." Maya's chest tightened. Something about that didn't sit right with her. She wasn't just any passenger. She was a soldier who had served her country. She had been deployed to dangerous areas, risking her life to protect others, and this was how she was being treated. Relegated to the back of the plane like she didn't matter. "Look, I've had enough of this," Maya said, her voice firm now. "I'm not going to sit in the back. I demand to speak with someone who can fix this." The attendant glanced around nervously, but she didn't respond. She just stepped aside and motioned for Maya to follow. Maya followed her to the gate, her mind spinning. She knew this wasn't just about a seat. It was something more, something deeper that she couldn't quite understand yet. As they stood by the gate, Maya heard a voice call out. A man in a black suit had approached them, his eyes scanning her with a look of quiet authority. He didn't look like an ordinary passenger. He was calm, professional, and maybe a little too observant for comfort. "I'm sorry to interrupt," the man said, his voice smooth. "I'm the manager of this flight. Is there a problem?" The flight attendant nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. We've had some confusion with this passenger's seating." Maya straightened up. "I don't know what's going on, but I was promised a first-class seat. My ticket says first class, and now I'm being told I have to sit in economy. This isn't right." The manager's gaze softened, but there was something almost dismissive in his expression. "Unfortunately, we are fully booked in first class. We do not have any open seats. You'll have to make do in economy." Maya felt the sting of his words, but she didn't let it show. "I've been on flights with more passengers than this, and I've never been treated like this before." The manager's eyes narrowed slightly. "I'm sorry, Mom, but there's nothing I can do." Maya stared at him for a long moment. It wasn't just about the seat. It was about the feeling she had in her gut. Something was wrong. This wasn't an accident. As she turned and walked toward the back of the plane, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something much bigger than just a seating mistake. The discrimination. Maya sank into her seat in economy, trying to push down the anger building up inside her. Her eyes scanned the cramped space, filled with passengers chatting and settling in for the long flight ahead. The noise of the plane boarding only seemed to amplify the isolation she felt. She had been looking forward to the peace and comfort of first class. After all, it was part of her reward for months of hard work and sacrifice. But here she was, in the back of the plane, surrounded by people who didn't even seem to notice her frustration. As the last few passengers took their seats, Maya couldn't shake the feeling of being an outsider. Her uniform, which had always made her proud, now felt like a symbol of something different, something that made her stand out in a way she didn't want. She adjusted her cap and straightened her posture, trying to look calm, but inside, her thoughts were swirling. Something about this whole situation wasn't right. It wasn't just a mix-up with her seat. There was something more going on, something that she couldn't quite put her finger on. "Excuse me," a voice suddenly broke through her thoughts. She turned to see a middle-aged man in a business suit standing beside her. His expression was polite, but there was a hint of curiosity in his eyes. Maya gave him a quick nod. "Yes. I'm sorry to bother you, but you were supposed to be in first class, right?" he asked, his voice low enough not to draw attention. He wasn't asking out of concern. It was more like a statement than a question. Maya's chest tightened. "Yes, that's right," she replied, her voice cold now. She wasn't sure why this stranger was asking, but something about his tone made her uneasy. "I saw what happened," the man continued, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "They gave you the wrong seat, didn't they?" Maya stared at him, not sure how to respond. He was right, but it felt strange to have a random passenger bringing it up. Why was he paying so much attention to her? "It wasn't just a mistake," she said, finally deciding to speak her mind. "There's more to it. They told me I wasn't allowed in first class, but I know it wasn't full. There's something off about this." The man nodded slowly, his expression sympathetic but knowing. "I can tell. I've been flying for years, and I've seen how things work around here. Sometimes there's more to these mix-ups than just bad luck." Maya's eyebrows furrowed. "What do you mean?" The man leaned in slightly, his voice lowering even more. "Sometimes airlines treat certain passengers differently. Not always on paper, but in practice. They pick and choose who they want in first class." Maya's heart skipped a beat. "Are you saying this is because of me?" she asked, feeling a wave of disbelief crash over her. The man gave her a brief nod. "I've seen it happen before. You're not the first one." Her mind raced. Was this really happening? She had heard stories of discrimination before, but to experience it firsthand, to have it so blatant, felt like a gut punch. She had always believed that in the military, race didn't matter, that they were all equal, fighting for the same cause. But here, on this flight, It felt like she was being told something completely different. Just then, the flight attendant passed by, and Maya watched her walk with a forced smile, glancing at her once before looking away quickly. That made her feel even worse, like they were all in on it. She wasn't imagining it. This wasn't just a mistake or bad luck. She was being treated differently, and everyone around her could see it. As the plane began to taxi down the runway, Maya sank back in her seat, staring out the window, trying to gather her thoughts. She didn't want to make a scene. Not yet. She still needed to know more. But deep down, she knew this wasn't just about a seat on an airplane. It was something much bigger. The man in the suit turned to her again, breaking the silence. "If you want to make a difference, you'll have to speak up," he said quietly. "You can't let them get away with this." Maya looked at him, unsure what he meant, but before she could ask, he stood up and walked to the front of the plane. As the flight continued, Maya couldn't ignore the whispers around her. Passengers in first class, sitting just beyond the curtain that separated the two sections of the plane, were speaking in low voices. Maya could hear their words drifting back to her. "She doesn't belong up there," one of them said. Maya caught the tone of superiority in their voice, as if she was somehow beneath them. "She doesn't look like the kind of person who should be sitting in first class." The words stung more than they should have. Maya clenched her fists, trying to ignore the painful truth sinking in. This wasn't just about a mix-up or a misunderstanding. This was about something deeper, something that wasn't going to go away on its own. She glanced over at the man who had spoken to her earlier. He was seated several rows ahead now, but his eyes met hers across the aisle. There was a quiet understanding between them. He knew what was happening, and so did she. For the rest of the flight, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. It wasn't just by the people in the back of the plane. It was by the flight attendants, the manager, and maybe even the passengers in first class. She felt like a target, and the more she thought about it, the angrier she became. This wasn't going to end here. She couldn't just sit back and let them treat her like this. Maya had served her country with pride, and she wasn't about to let anyone make her feel small, no matter what. The plane was still in the air, but Maya knew that when they landed, things were going to change. She wasn't going to let this go. Not without a fight. The confrontation. Maya couldn't shake the feeling that the eyes of the plane were on her. Every time she moved, it seemed like someone was watching. The whispers continued around her, but they didn't stop there. Maya could sense the judgment and the weight of their eyes, boring into her like she was some sort of spectacle. She tried to stay calm, to keep her thoughts in check, but anger simmered beneath her skin. As the plane flew higher, the tension between her and the rest of the passengers seemed to grow. She wasn't sure what was worse, the quiet comments or the cold silence. Every glance she caught from the people in first class made her feel smaller and smaller, as if she didn't belong there at all. She had earned her place in the front, and now she was stuck here in the back, feeling like an outsider in her own country. Suddenly, the voice of the flight attendant snapped her out of her thoughts. "Excuse me, ma'am," the woman said, standing in the aisle with a polite but firm expression. "I need to speak with you for a moment." Maya's stomach turned. She knew what this was about. The flight attendant had probably been sent to tell her she couldn't sit there anymore. Maya had expected this, but it didn't make it any easier. "I'll be right back," Maya said, standing up and following the flight attendant to the front of the plane. Her mind raced with 100 questions. Was this it? Was she really about to be kicked off the flight? Or was this just another attempt to remind her that she didn't belong? When they reached the front of the plane, the flight attendant stepped aside, revealing a middle-aged man wearing a uniform, another member of the airline staff. He looked at Maya with a mixture of professionalism and something else. It wasn't a look of kindness or concern. It was a look that made Maya feel like she was being judged. "Ma'am," the man said with a stern voice, "we've received a complaint about your seating arrangements. I'm afraid I need to ask you to return to your assigned seat in economy." Maya's heart pounded in her chest. "I don't understand," she said, keeping her voice steady. I was assigned a seat in first class. I've already shown my ticket to the boarding staff. There's been a mistake. Why am I being moved? The man's eyes flickered for a moment, as if searching for the right words. But when he spoke again, his tone was clipped, dismissive. It's not a mistake. We've reviewed your situation, and we believe that the seating arrangement is more appropriate for you in economy. Maya's mouth went dry. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. It was as if they were treating her like she didn't deserve to be there. Her stomach twisted with a deep sense of injustice. She had worked hard to get where she was. She had earned that seat, yet here she was, being told she didn't belong. I've served my country, Maya said, trying to keep the anger from boiling over. I've earned my place. This is my seat. I don't care what you think. I'm not going back. The man's eyes hardened, and he stepped closer, his voice lower now. You need to understand, ma'am. This isn't about your service. This is about the image we want to project. It's a matter of class, and unfortunately, your presence in first class might make other passengers uncomfortable. Maya felt her blood run cold. The man's words hung in the air like a slap to the face. She couldn't believe what he was saying. Was this really happening? Were they seriously telling her that because of who she was, she didn't fit the image they wanted to project? Are you telling me that because I'm black, I don't belong in first class? Maya's voice shook with disbelief. The words had come out before she even realized it, but now they hung between them like an accusation. The flight attendant looked away, clearly uncomfortable. The man, however, didn't flinch. I'm not saying that, he replied coolly. I'm simply saying that we need to keep a certain image for our premium customers. It's not personal. It's business. Maya's heart felt like it was going to explode. This wasn't just business. It was discrimination. And it was happening right in front of her eyes. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. She glanced around the cabin, hoping for some support, but no one looked back. Everyone was either busy with their own business or pretending not to notice. Maya felt as if she were completely alone. No, Maya said firmly, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and determination. I'm not leaving this seat. If you want me to go, you'll have to drag me out. The man's expression faltered for just a second, but then he regained his composure. We'll see about that, he said, turning and walking away. The flight attendant followed him, giving Maya a look of pity before she disappeared down the aisle. Maya stood there for a moment, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She couldn't believe what had just happened. The man's words echoed in her mind, but they only fueled the fire inside her. She wasn't going to let them get away with this. She wasn't going to let them tell her she didn't belong. As the plane continued its journey, Maya sat in her seat, her fists clenched and her mind racing. What was she supposed to do now? Was this something she could ignore, or did she have to take action? The quiet whispers and sidelong glances from the first-class passengers had not stopped, but now Maya's anger had a new edge to it. She wasn't just angry at the man who had confronted her. She was angry at everything. The system, the people who stayed silent, and the injustice that seemed to be accepted without question. This wasn't over. Maya had a plan now. She was going to make sure that when this flight landed, she didn't just walk off the plane with her head down. No, she was going to make sure that they knew her name, that they knew what she stood for. And when they heard her story, they would never forget it. The public outcry. Maya's heart was pounding as the plane continued its journey through the skies. She was no longer just a passenger. She was a woman who had been wronged. And now she had a choice to make. Her mind raced, playing out different scenarios. What should she do next? She knew she couldn't let the situation slide, but what if speaking out only made things worse? The whispers around her hadn't stopped. In fact, they had only grown louder. The passengers who had been talking about her earlier now exchanged glances and mumbled under their breath. Maya could feel their eyes on her. But this time, it was different. This time, she didn't feel small. This time, she felt a fire inside her. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for anyone who had ever been treated unfairly, anyone who had been made to feel less than. The plane's intercom crackled to life, and a voice rang out. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be reaching our cruising altitude in about 10 minutes. Please make sure your seatbelts are fastened and your tray tables are up." Maya barely heard the announcement. Her thoughts were too focused on the situation at hand. She could feel the anger bubbling inside her, but she couldn't let it explode just yet. She needed to be strategic. Her hand reached into her purse, her fingers brushing against her phone. Without thinking, she pulled it out and opened the camera. The red recording light blinked on. She had an idea. Maya steadied the phone in her hand and pointed it toward herself. She took a deep breath before speaking directly into the camera. "Hello, everyone. My name is Maya Johnson, and I am a soldier in the U.S. Army," she began, her voice strong but shaking with emotion. "I've been flying for years, but today I was rejected from my seat in first class, my seat that I paid for. The airline didn't think I belonged there because of who I am." She paused for a moment, collecting herself. "I'm not just a soldier. I'm a person, and I deserve to be treated with respect, just like everyone else. But today, I was told I wasn't good enough to sit in the seat I earned. I'm speaking out because I know I'm not the only one who has faced discrimination. And I won't stand for it. Not now, not ever." Maya pressed stop and stared at the screen for a moment, as if hoping the words would somehow change the reality she was facing. But they didn't. This was still happening, and it wasn't going to stop until someone did something about it. She hesitated for a second, but then pressed post. The video was out there. It was raw and real, and it couldn't be taken back. Maya felt a strange mixture of fear and relief. She had just shared her truth with the world. Now she had no idea what would happen next. But she knew one thing for sure. She had made a choice. She was no longer going to be quiet. Meanwhile, as the video began to make its way through social media, the airline staff was unaware of the storm brewing. They were busy with their duties, checking on the passengers, offering drinks, and ensuring the flight was running smoothly. But all of that was about to change. In the airport terminal, passengers who had witnessed the exchange between Maya and the airline staff were already beginning to talk. Some had been shocked by what they'd seen. Others had been uncomfortable but stayed silent. But now, as the video spread, those same passengers were starting to realize the injustice of what had occurred. The hashtag Justice for Maya began to trend on social media, quickly gaining traction. People shared the video, commenting on how they couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. Many praised Maya for speaking out, while others demanded that the airline be held accountable for its actions. Back on the plane, Maya sat quietly, watching the world she had known begin to shift. Her phone buzzed with notifications, messages of support, questions from reporters, and people asking what had happened next. The attention she had feared was now happening. But this time, it wasn't making her feel smaller. It was making her feel empowered. As the flight continued, Maya saw a flight attendant walking toward her. This wasn't the same woman who had confronted her earlier, but Maya could tell from her body language that something was different. The flight attendant looked nervous but determined. "Maya," she said, her voice quiet, "I just wanted to say that I'm sorry for what happened. I didn't have anything to do with it, but I understand why you're upset. We're going to make it right." Maya raised an eyebrow, unsure of what to think. "What does that mean?" The flight attendant shifted on her feet. "The airline is aware of the video, and we've been instructed to offer you a full refund and a voucher for another flight. They also want to meet with you as soon as we land to discuss the situation." Maya's heart skipped a beat. This was happening faster than she had expected. "They want to meet with me?" she asked, a hint of disbelief in her voice. The flight attendant nodded. "Yes, they want to apologize in person. They're taking this very seriously now." Maya leaned back in her seat, her mind racing. She hadn't expected this. The airline had obviously been forced to react quickly, But would this apology be enough? Was it just damage control, or did they truly understand the gravity of what had happened? Before she could respond, the flight attendant smiled softly and walked away, leaving Maya to contemplate her next steps. The tension in the air had changed, and Maya couldn't help but wonder what would happen when they landed. Would the airline live up to their promises, or was this just the beginning of a much bigger battle? Maya's story had already sparked a fire, and now the world was watching. The next chapter was about to begin. The unexpected meeting. The plane touched down, and the sounds of the wheels skimming the runway broke Maya's concentration. Her mind had been a whirlwind since the video went viral. Her phone continued to buzz nonstop, filled with messages, news updates, and interview requests. But none of that mattered as much as what was about to happen next. As the plane came to a complete stop and the seatbelt sign blinked off, Maya stood up and gathered her belongings. She was ready for whatever was coming. Despite the chaos and attention, she knew she had to face the consequences of speaking out. But the one thing she wasn't prepared for was the unexpected meeting that awaited her. Before she could even make it to the exit, two airline officials approached her. One was a woman in her 40s, dressed in a smart suit, and the other a man who looked a little younger but had the same serious expression on his face. "Maya Johnson?" the woman asked, her voice calm but firm. Maya nodded. "Yes, that's me. We're with the airline, and we've been instructed to meet with you as soon as we land. We're truly sorry for what happened earlier, and we want to resolve this situation in a way that's fair to you." Maya stared at them, trying to read their faces. She had no idea whether they were being genuine or if this was just another attempt to silence her. But one thing was certain. The airline was aware of the storm they were facing. "Okay," Maya said cautiously. "Where are we going?" The man gestured toward a door near the front of the terminal. "Please, follow us." Maya walked with them, her steps slow but steady. She couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. She was about to enter a room where she might finally get some answers, or at least hear the company's side of the story. The small conference room was simple but modern, with a large table in the center and chairs lined up around it. Maya took a seat at the head of the table, and the airline official sat across from her. The woman spoke first, her voice laced with a tone of apology. "Maya, we want to start by saying how truly sorry we are for what happened. The actions of our staff were completely unacceptable, and we understand how this situation has affected you. It's never our intention to treat any passenger unfairly." Maya felt a cold knot form in her stomach. She had heard this kind of talk before, polite words designed to make the problem go away. But she wasn't going to let that happen. "I appreciate the apology," Maya said, her voice calm, though there was a fire in her eyes. "But it's not enough. You didn't just inconvenience me. You disrespected me, and you disrespected every person who's ever fought for this country." The man across from her nodded, looking serious. "You're absolutely right, and we recognize that. That's why we've decided to take immediate action." Maya's curiosity was piqued. What kind of action? The woman slid a piece of paper toward her. "First, we want to offer you a full refund for the ticket you purchased, plus a complimentary voucher for any future flight. But more importantly, we want to make a public statement acknowledging our mistake. We're planning a press release, and we'd like you to be part of it." Maya blinked, surprised by the offer. She had expected an apology, maybe a refund, but this was more than she had imagined. Still, she wasn't sure if this was enough to make things right. "And what about the staff member who kicked me out of my seat?" Maya asked, her voice steady but with an edge. "What's going to happen to her?" The man shifted uncomfortably. "We've already started an internal investigation. The staff member has been suspended pending the outcome of the investigation, and we're ensuring that this never happens again." Maya nodded slowly, taking in the information. It sounded like they were taking her concerns seriously, but she couldn't shake the feeling that it was all part of the company's effort to save face. She had been wronged, and while this meeting might be the first step toward accountability, she wasn't sure it was enough. I don't want just an apology, Maya said firmly, locking eyes with them. I want to make sure that no one else has to go through what I did. I want you to change your policies to make sure that no one is ever made to feel less than. That's the only way this will be enough. The woman leaned forward, her tone earnest. We completely understand. We're already working on new training programs for our staff, and we'll be updating our customer service policies to make sure something like this doesn't happen again. Your voice matters, Maya, and we're taking it seriously. Maya felt a sense of relief wash over her. It wasn't everything she wanted, but it was a start. The company was finally acknowledging its mistakes, and it seemed like they were committed to making real changes. But this isn't just about me, Maya continued. It's about every person who's ever been overlooked or judged based on their race or background. This is bigger than a refund. This is about creating a culture where respect comes first. The airline officials nodded in agreement, and the woman smiled slightly. We hear you, Maya, and we're committed to making sure this change happens. You have our word. Maya sat back in her chair, letting the weight of the conversation settle in. The room felt different now, less tense, but she knew this wasn't the end. The journey was far from over. There were still people out there who needed to hear her story, and Maya knew she wasn't going to stop until the changes she demanded were made. As she stood up to leave, the man spoke one last time. We'll be in touch with the next steps, and thank you for your courage, Maya. Maya nodded. I didn't do it for the thanks. I did it because it was the right thing to do. The door closed behind her as she stepped back into the busy terminal, ready to face whatever came next. But now, there was a sense of calm in her heart. She had made her voice heard, and she had sparked a change. And that was only the beginning. The press conference. The days after Maya's meeting with the airline were a blur of phone calls, emails, and media inquiries. Her social media accounts exploded with support and backlash, and her story was being shared worldwide. But amidst all the noise, one thing stood out. She was about to take the next big step in her journey for justice. The airline had arranged a press conference, and Maya would be there to make her voice heard in front of the world. It was early morning when Maya walked into the hotel conference room. The air was heavy with anticipation, and the camera crews had already set up their equipment. Maya felt a surge of nerves, but she knew this was bigger than herself. This was about setting a new precedent for fairness and equality. She was escorted to the front, where a podium stood in front of a row of microphones. The media were already seated, their eyes trained on her, their cameras ready to capture every moment. Maya took a deep breath and stepped up to the podium. The room fell silent. Good morning, Maya began, her voice calm but strong. I stand before you today, not just as a soldier, but as a woman who believes in equality, respect, and fairness for all. What happened to me on that flight was unacceptable. But it's not just my story. It's the story of every person who has been overlooked, dismissed, or treated unfairly because of their race, gender, or background. She paused, letting her words settle into the room. Airlines should be places where all passengers feel safe, respected, and valued. We all pay the same price for a ticket, and we all deserve to be treated with dignity. I was humiliated when I was removed from my seat because of my skin color, because of who I am. And it wasn't just me. It could have been anyone. But I stood up, not just for myself, but for everyone who's ever been made to feel small. Maya's words were met with murmurs of agreement from the audience. She could feel the weight of the moment, but she knew this was just the beginning. She wasn't there to just talk about the problem. She was there to demand a solution. I'm here today because change is needed. We need to ensure that no one is ever made to feel less than, whether they're traveling for business, leisure, or something more important. No one should ever be judged based on their race or background. And I'm asking the airline, and every airline, to look at the way they treat their customers. Policies need to change. People need to be held accountable. Maya's eyes scanned the room, meeting the gaze of several reporters. They were hanging on every word, eager to ask questions, but Maya wasn't finished yet. "I've been in the military. I've fought for this country. I've made sacrifices, just like many of you. But none of that should matter when I'm sitting in an airport or on a plane. What should matter is respect, fairness, and the simple fact that we are all equal." A reporter raised his hand, and Maya nodded for him to speak. "Maya, the airline has already apologized and promised to take steps to change their policies. What do you hope will happen next?" Maya took a moment before answering, choosing her words carefully. "What I hope is that this isn't just an apology. I hope this sparks a movement. I hope that the airline isn't just saying sorry to avoid the bad press. They need to show real, tangible actions. That means better training for staff, more accountability, and a commitment to creating a welcoming environment for every passenger, regardless of their race or background." Another reporter stood up, asking, "What do you say to people who believe that this is just a publicity stunt for you or the airline?" Maya felt a surge of frustration, but kept her voice steady. "This isn't about me. This is about everyone who has ever felt like they didn't belong. And if speaking out helps make the world a little better, then I'm okay with people calling it whatever they want. I'm not doing this for fame or attention. I'm doing it for the change that needs to happen." She could feel the shift in the room. The reporters were no longer just listening. They were engaged. Maya had their attention, and they were starting to understand the gravity of her message. "Let me be clear," Maya continued. "I don't want this to be the end. I want to see a future where no one has to go through what I went through. I want people to stop being afraid of standing up, of speaking out. If we all come together and demand change, we can create a world where respect is the baseline, not the exception." The reporters asked a few more questions, but Maya's mind was focused on the bigger picture. She knew this press conference wasn't just about her. It was about starting a movement that could make real, lasting change in the airline industry and beyond. As the conference ended, Maya stepped down from the podium, feeling a sense of accomplishment. She had said what needed to be said, and now it was up to others to listen and act. The press conference had done its job. Maya's message had been delivered loud and clear. But the work wasn't over yet. She was determined to see through the changes she had started. As she walked out of the room, reporters continued to shout questions, but Maya had already answered them with her words. It was now time for the actions to follow. Her heart swelled with a quiet sense of pride. She had begun a conversation that couldn't be ignored, and she was ready for the challenges that lay ahead. Because Maya knew that real change was never easy, but it was always worth the fight. The change that followed. The weeks that followed Maya's press conference were a whirlwind. Her story continued to spread across news outlets, social media, and even reached some of the most influential voices in the country. But even as the world began to take notice, Maya knew that true change would not come from headlines alone. It was time to hold the airline accountable and to ensure that her fight for justice extended far beyond her own personal experience. The first sign of change came when the airline, under intense pressure, publicly announced new policies aimed at improving the experience for all passengers. Maya watched from the sidelines as they made promises to increase staff training on racial sensitivity, implement stricter anti-discrimination protocols, and introduce a more transparent complaint process. But Maya didn't trust words alone. She needed to see actions. One afternoon, Maya received a call from a reporter who had covered her story from the beginning. "Maya," the voice on the other end of the line said, "we're hearing rumors that the airline has actually started making changes. They've begun a full review of their customer service training, and there's talk of a partnership with organizations that focus on racial equality. Have you heard anything?" Maya paused. She had heard whispers, but hearing it from a trusted source made it feel more real. She wasn't ready to celebrate yet, but she was cautiously optimistic. "I've heard the same, but we'll see if it's more than just talk. Change takes time, and I'll be watching every step of the way." Maya's days were now filled with meetings, interviews, and conversations with activists, lawyers, and everyday people who reached out to thank her for speaking up. She was quickly becoming the face of a movement that demanded equality in all industries, not just airlines. But it wasn't just the airline that Maya focused on. As the movement gained momentum, Maya began collaborating with organizations that supported minority groups, veterans, and marginalized communities. Her mission had grown from fighting for a single seat on a plane to ensuring that every individual, regardless of race, background, or gender, was treated with respect in every aspect of their lives. The fight wasn't just about one injustice. It was about dismantling the systems that allowed such injustices to exist in the first place. One day, Maya found herself in a conference room, sitting with a group of influential leaders from various industries. They were discussing how businesses could create more inclusive environments, not just by making policies, but by actively listening to those who were affected by discrimination. Maya's heart swelled with pride as she shared her vision. Real change comes when people not only apologize for their mistakes, but also take actionable steps to make sure they don't happen again. This is about accountability. It's about making sure that people know they won't be silenced, no matter who they are or where they come from. The leaders in the room nodded, and Maya could see that her words were making an impact. In that moment, she realized that the journey she had started was far from over. There was still so much work to be done, but she was no longer alone in this fight. The world was listening, and more people were beginning to stand up, just as she had done. Months later, the airline CEO invited Maya to a special event, where they publicly acknowledged her role in helping them improve their practices. Maya was hesitant at first, unsure if their words matched their actions, but she agreed to attend. As she stepped onto the stage, the applause was deafening. It was a moment that signified the power of one voice, one person willing to speak out and challenge the status quo. The CEO spoke first. "Maya, your courage has not only changed the way we do business, it has changed the entire industry. We know that we have a long way to go, but we are committed to ensuring that the treatment of every passenger is fair, respectful, and just. We are committed to never allowing what happened to you to happen to anyone else." Maya stood beside the CEO, listening to the words she had fought so hard to hear. But in her heart, she knew that this moment was only part of a much larger story. The real victory wasn't in the apology or the promises. It was in the ongoing work that would take place behind the scenes, in the communities, and in the hearts of those who believed that change was possible. As the event concluded, Maya stepped off the stage with a sense of quiet satisfaction. She had achieved what she set out to do, but her journey wasn't over. She was determined to keep pushing for justice, to keep speaking out against injustice, and to keep fighting for those who didn't have a voice. She walked out of the building and into the cool evening air, the weight of the moment settling over her. The world was changing, slowly but surely, and Maya knew that with every step she took, she was a part of that change. Her fight had started with a single act of rejection, but it had turned into something much greater, something that would echo for years to come.